The conflict between the Apaches and the Comanches stands among the most enduring and brutal in the history of Native American tribes. Sworn enemies, they fought in what the Spanish in Mexico called a war of extermination in the late 1500s. The eastern Apaches established a dominant presence in the southern Great Plains region, an area that provided good buffalo hunting grounds and space for agriculture, allowing them a semi-agrarian lifestyle. This diversification of their diet and close proximity to the most valuable food source in all of North America was a significant advantage. Meanwhile, the Comanches were outcasts, forced into unfavorable territories by more powerful groups like the Apaches. Their culture became aggressive and vengeful, but by the mid-1600s, a major change instigated by their greatest enemy would lead them to become the most powerful native group in American history. In the 16th century, Spanish success in Mexico fueled a continuous desire for conquest. Europeans gradually moved north, continuing to colonize and spread their influence until they reached Apache territory. The Spanish conquest brought metal armor, weapons, and hundreds of horses. As they spread across the territory of modern New Mexico around 1600 with overwhelming power, they quickly subdued many native groups in the region, forcing them to adopt Christianity and work for them as payment, much like they had done in Central and South America in the previous 100 years. However, the nearby Apaches were not so complacent. They reacted violently to the new Spanish settlements, stealing horses in the process. Observing the Spanish from a distance, they learned to ride them. By the 1650s, the Apaches were conducting mounted raids, and the added speed of the horse made them even more dangerous and effective. The constant harassment was more than the Spanish in the region could bear. Spanish settlements like Taos and Santa Fe were frequent targets, and the Pueblo Indians, whom the Spanish had conquered, were the unfortunate victims of Apache terror. As Spanish subjects, the Pueblos expected protection, but the Spanish could not effectively provide any. Anger grew quickly. The Apaches would kill anyone who opposed them and then disappear into the western landscape with hundreds of horses and other supplies. By 1680, Apache anger had become such a problem that the Pueblos gave up on Spanish protection and revolted, driving the Spanish out of New Mexico. In the process, 1,000 Spanish horses escaped. Mustangs, horses well suited to life on the Great Plains, spread out, changing everything for the Comanches. Fast forward a few decades, the Spanish continued to be constantly attacked by the Apaches. However, in 1706, the Spanish began to notice that the attacks against them had ceased. Reports started to come in that the Apaches were behaving strangely. Bands like the guerrillas and mescaleros apparently left the plains, abandoning their settlements and farms in a hurry. The Spanish heard rumors of great battles but had no idea who the Apaches were fighting. The invaders from the north, mounted on horses, were powerful, fast, and dangerous. By the 1720s, the Apaches were so devastated that many bands moved to the mountains or even sought protection from the Spanish. Some bands did not get that far. Spanish expeditions discovered that bands of Apaches, such as the Pharaones, Carlanes, and Palomas, had been completely exterminated by an enemy the Spanish could not even identify. The Utes provided the answer. The ghostly invaders from the north were called Comanche in their language, meaning those who are against me all the time, an appropriate name. Historically, the Comanches are often described as unimpressive, intimidated by other tribes in the region, including the Apaches. They were pushed to the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains to eke out a living in less desirable territory, something they never forgot. In the mid-17th century, they encountered the horse, the same horses that had been freed as a result of the Apache harassment of the Pueblos and the Spanish. This changed everything for them. In the 2 decades following the Spanish withdrawal from New Mexico, the horse spread like wildfire, known as the Great Horse Dispersal. All tribes in the region began using them, but the Comanches did it better. They learned to breed horses, while other tribes did not bother. On the plains, horses were currency, and the Comanches were rich. The eastern Apaches, like many plains groups, were at least semi-agrarian, which tied them to the land. The Comanches, on the other hand, were complete nomads and could be anywhere on the plains, with horses giving them the ability to cover previously inaccessible areas. The Comanches were buffalo hunters, and their range was incredibly valuable. As warriors, this made them terrifying. Most raids occurred in the spring and summer, when the grass on the plains was tall enough to provide food for their horses. They typically moved at night, with the full moon illuminating the plains, giving them visibility to attack and escape. The attacks were brutal, with killings, tortures, and acts too gruesome to mention on YouTube, so common that settlers referred to these conditions as the Comanche Moon. The greatest advantage that made them more effective than everyone else was that they fought entirely mounted, something almost no other tribe did. George Catlin, an artist who witnessed the Comanches firsthand, described them. On foot, they are one of the most unattractive and slovenly-looking races of Indians I have ever seen, but the moment they mount their horses, they seem immediately metamorphosed. I am ready, without hesitation, to pronounce the Comanches the most extraordinary horsemen I have ever seen in all my travels. They learn to shoot a bow perfectly while riding towards the enemy or buffalo, protecting their bodies from enemies by hanging on the sides of their animals while simultaneously shooting under the neck with deadly precision. The Apaches used the horse to help with travel but dismounted to fight on foot. They were a match for anyone and as brutal as the Comanches, but if they could catch the Comanches without their mounts, they might have had some advantage at times. However, the Comanches lived on the horse, and finding them was nearly impossible because, in war, they never slept in the same place twice. It wasn't like this for the Apaches. Farming made them predictable, and their fighting style was outdated. Author T.R. Fehrenbach put it best in his book Comanches, A History of a People. It was this taste for corn that killed them when their lands were invaded by true savages on horseback. If the Apaches were a terror to the Spanish, the Comanches were worse for the Apaches. But their true mission was not to exterminate them but to conquer resources, most importantly, the buffalo range. The Comanches remembered how they were treated when they were weak, which made them vengeful and aggressive toward their enemies. In Thomas Britton's book Light Pan and Patches, it is written, the Comanches' purpose was always the same: to catch the Apaches off guard in their rancherias, make a sudden attack, kill as many Apaches as they could, capture some women and children for the slave trade in New Mexico, loot the rancherias, and destroy the crops. The war between these two great powers, which lasted for decades, was largely lost to history. Even the Spanish only witnessed it from a distance, but we know it was brutal enough that Comanches everywhere became enemies of all Apaches. The light bands were among the last remaining Apaches on the plains in the 1720s. The Mescaleros and the Jay Carillas had already retreated by 1723. A mysterious conflict called El Gran Sierra del Ferrero involved a massive Comanche attack against the Lipans. The battle lasted several days and resulted in the deaths of many Lipan warriors and the capture of several women and children. Forced to retreat into mountainous deserts, the Lipans were trapped between the Comanches to the north and the Spanish to the south. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more fascinating stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. Thank you for watching.